Liberals have always pretended that they're against war, but in their quest for power, they started 3 wars in our society, and they've convinced blacks to just look the other way in their quest for social justice. And even though there's mountains of data pointing to the connection between religion and traditional marriage, to civil order, protection of personal property, and economic prosperity, blacks got caught up in these political promises of social justice and became the casualties in 3 liberal wars. The first war the progressives declared was a war on religion, which weakened our public institutions and opened the door for a culture of corruption. You know, when your lawmakers are at 13% approval ratings, you must know something has broken down. When we look in our own black community and are watching legislators that were put into power being carted off to spend the rest of their lives in jail and or years in jail, we know that something has gone wrong. Well, what has gone wrong is we scrubbed our schools of all reference to God. In 1962, the Supreme Court struck down state-sponsored school prayer. In 1963, the court ruled that you can't read the Bible or recite the Lord's Prayer in the public school. By 1980, the courts ruled to take the 10 Commandments out of the public schools. The second war that liberals declared was a war on marriage, and this weakened women and opened a door to this new culture of meaninglessness. Homosexuality now is dividing us and bringing hostility into the public square. Abortion has deeply hurt us. 55 million dead in 40 years should give us all great pause. And it's fascinating to me that the liberal left through the Democrat Party would showcase it so aggressively their positions on abortion at their national convention that then after that, God-fearing Christian people would go in a voting booth and put this type of violence in power. We know that something has broken down in communication and the connection between religion and civil order. And I'm not going to get too much into pro-life or abortion at this moment because I know that later in the day you'll be hearing some specifics about what it has done in our community, but just know that there is something wrong with the people when now they are killing more than they are birthing in certain communities. In 1960, 75% of American adults were married compared to around 50% today. In 1960, 45% of young adults between 18 and 24 were married compared to just 9% today. I'm going to repeat that. In 1960, 45% of young adults between 18 and 24 were married compared to just 9% today. Now, in my column this week, in looking back at the 50 years since the Civil Rights Act and the I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C., I look specifically at the black numbers. So that'll be out over this weekend. I just had to finish that last night. And then Scripps has it in their hands, and they'll be distributing over this weekend. And so you'll see it in different papers all week. It's interesting that even the Chicago Sun-Times is now carrying me on a really regular basis. Usually if you have a paper that's that center-left, they will ignore the columns on moral positions and, you know, perhaps print the ones that I talk about economics. But they have been following this carefully because I think that many in our society are finding out that this is just not a black problem. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was president, 18% of births were outside of marriage compared to 43% today. 1.7 million in 2011 alone. Blacks moved from 22% in the 60s to 72% today. Well, those numbers have actually gone up a little bit. Whites moved out of wedlock birth rates from 3% in the 60s to 30% today. And Hispanics, while there was no data in the 60s because they weren't a special interest group for the politicals to manipulate and use calculative to win elections, we do have data today. And their out of wedlock birth rates are at 53%. The third war that the progressives declared on our society was a war on poverty, which weakened family and opened the door to a culture of entitlement. The Great Society has had great cost. In just 50 years, blacks went from 70% of our children being raised in married households to 70% of our children being raised in single households. In just 50 years, blacks went from the civil rights movement to remove governmental barriers over education to current black dropout rates in most black neighborhoods is at 70%. In just 50 years, blacks went from landowners and entrepreneurs to today, less than 5% of blacks own their own business, with some 80% of those businesses are mom and pops, grossing around $100,000 a year or less. You want to know why there's a wealth gap? There's a wealth gap because people are not owners, they're servers. And the Bible is clear that the borrower will always be subject to the lender. I don't care how many politicians you hire to try to take from one and give to the other. An individual is going to do what he can to hold on to his own money, but the money itself has its own nature. Money is fungible, and its nature is to make more of itself, and it will move if someone tries to capture it, and it will move continuously if you try to capture it. It will even go abroad if you try to capture it. So all of this discussion about we're going to be able to close the wealth gap through manipulations through the political process is a lie. If blacks want to improve their economic situation, there are some formulas that they should look at and we should take very seriously. Family life is one of those areas that we should consider. Making sure that we take education seriously. Making sure that we work and always get in and work just harder than the person above you. Making sure that you learn how to save and invest, and making sure that you understand the concept of charity the way that God has defined charity, and He will then bless your life. The legacy of the 50-year quest of blacks for social justice is our blighted inner cities, our dysfunctional government-run schools, and our broken black families. And at root of America's economic problems today is government dependency, and blacks are leading the way. Government dependency gripped America's poor and minority communities some 50 years ago and locked 3 generations into economic stagnation. And today, government dependency is choking our entire society. Today, 70% of non-defense tax intake is a transfer to individuals. 70% of the money that goes into Washington, D.C. goes directly out to an individual. Today, 47% of Americans are in some way government dependent. And now when Mitt Romney said that during the last election, the left went after him and reminded the society that some of those government dependent are seniors and our veterans, as if he was supposed to back up off of these ideas of putting forth the truth in our society. And of course, he did back up on those ideas to put the truth in front of our society. Well, I'm going to ask the question about even those 2 groups that they said that we should be afraid to address the fact that they're government dependent because they're senior and or they're veterans. What kind of society that calls itself civil would have someone work all of their lives to get to a station in life that they're then government dependent? That at 75, 85 years old, they have to go to Uncle Sam and ask permission even to work to supplement their Social Security? And or that they've been still taxed in a home that they paid off years ago to the point that now they have to go to the government and ask them for food stamps to offset the monies that are going into the government coffers to pay a property tax of a land that should be theirs, not the government's. Today,